Hey there, it's Andrea, and welcome to the Voice of Influence podcast. Today I have with me Robin Hills. He is the director of EI for Change, a highly specialized company focusing on training, personal development, and coaching with the expertise in emotional intelligence, positive psychology, and neuroscience. Welcome to the Voice of Influence podcast, Robin.
It's a pleasure to be here, Andrea. Thank you for having me on your show.
Yeah, so I think that I want to start with what is emotional intelligence because I think we've all heard the term thrown around a lot, and it seems like it would have to do with emotions for sure and being able to handle them. But what's your definition of emotional intelligence?
My definition is all embracing, but it's very simple, but oh boy, does it hide a lot. It's being smart with your feelings in order that you can make good quality decisions and build up authentic relationships with the intention of taking action. That's it. But very easy to say, very, very difficult to do. And the reason being is you've got these two words coming together, which don't seem to fit together. One is emotional and the other is intelligence.
That's true. I do. I really like your succinct definition. That's very good. But you're right. I think that people do think of those two things as being a little different from each other. Why do you think that is? Why do you think we have such a differing perspective on emotions and intelligence?
Well, if I was to take you back into the middle of last century when really neither of us was around, emotions were really considered to be separate from rational thinking. They were mainly visceral, they were chaotic, they were haphazardous. And anybody who showed emotion showed really a lack of control. Now, with the introduction of a lot of research around the way in which we work with emotions, we view them in a completely different way. And we don't see them as being separate from reasoning, but a fundamental key part of reasoning. And the important thing now is to apply our intelligence to our emotions in order that we can make the decisions that we need to make and build up the relationships that we need in order to really perform at our best and have a happy, healthy life that really suits us and gives us the well-being that we require.
Hmm. Yeah. The emotions that people struggle with, in those tend to be the things that we would say get in the way of those the having that happy life. What's your view or take on positive or negative emotions?
Well, firstly, I think we've got to get away from this labeling of emotions being positive or negative, because emotions are physiological and psychological reactions to our environment. The parts of the brain which filter and process emotions are right in the center of the brain. It's in a structure called the limbic system. And the limbic system has no verbal reasoning capacity. So what happens is that the emotions are processed through this part of the brain, and then they are um, associated with the rational part of the brain, which will then put some kind of label on them. And it's not the emotion that is positive or negative, it's the behavior, it's our reaction, it's the choices that we make, which are either positive or negative. Now, having said that, there are going to be certain feelings that do not feel particularly pleasant. And I think we've got to recognize that. And there are going to be certain emotions that we have that feel a lot more pleasant. And we've got to recognize that. But with both of those emotions, whether they're pleasant or unpleasant, we can either use them constructively or we can use them destructively. And again, I think that's down to the choices that we make. So if we go back to looking at how emotions make us feel, unpleasant emotions, we're going to feel unpleasant emotions throughout the day. Now, Andrea, I didn't know you prior to coming on your podcast, and you didn't know me, but I would be surprised if neither of us experienced unpleasant emotions, because we had a degree of anxiety and we had a degree of concern around coming on the podcast. Now, they don't feel particularly good. There's a degree of nervousness, there's a degree of anxiety mixed with a little bit of fear. You and I have done hundreds. Why do we feel this? We actually need to feel those emotions in that way in order that we can psychologically and physiologically be in the right place to deliver a good podcast interview. So once you recognize that feeling of unpleasantness, it's not a case of go away, it's a case of, okay, great, I've got those feelings, let's work with them.
I have always kind of thought of feelings or emotions as being fuel of some kind. Do you agree with that statement, or do you, because the way you were just talking about it did seem like maybe they're fuel for that, for us making decisions and moving quickly or doing what we need to do to get ready for the podcast or whatever. Do you see them as fuel?
Yes, they drive our behavior. I would kind of rephrase the emotions being fuel. I would suggest that emotions contain data. Emotions are information, and it's up to us to interpret that data and interpret that information in order to make the choices that we need to make. And I think it's the choices that really are the fuel, or is the fuel that you're referring to. So does the data, does the information motivate us, drive us, or are we fairly ambivalent about the feeling and think, yeah, okay, I'm feeling this way, but okay, fine, go with the flow, whatever.
So when we're in our environment and we have an emotional reaction to something that happens, presumably in the limbic system, and then we start to think about that reaction, what is your take on how to use that data, how to interpret the data, how to translate that into action? What is that process? Is that the intelligence piece of the emotional intelligence, or what would you call that process?
No, I would say that is exactly where the intelligence piece sits. It's a case of recognizing that we are experiencing the emotion, and we have then the ability to make choices about that emotion. And it's that space between the emotion and reaction that is where the choice lies. Now, it's a tiny little space, but we've got to recognize that we have choices. And unless we manage and utilize our choices appropriately, we will allow the emotion to overwhelm us, take over, and control us and control our behavior. Now, that is not necessarily emotional intelligence, but I think we've also got to recognize there are going to be certain situations and certain states where our limbic system will become so awash with intense emotion, we can't function. And in those sort of situations, the emotions will take over for good or for bad. And what we've got to do is to make choices once that happens, and just hope that we're still around to make the right choices, rather than the fact that the emotions have led us into a set of circumstances which are really to our detriment.
Now that sounds like you're talking about something like PTSD or some sort of reaction to trauma or that sort of thing. Is that what you're talking about?
No, I think well, to a certain extent, yes, it is, but that's at one end of the spectrum. I think at the other end of the spectrum, it's just a case of recognizing throughout the day we are going to experience a range of emotions, and whether it's a simple emotion like, am I going to have a cup of tea or a cup of coffee? You will be driven by an emotion in order to make that decision. Do I get out of bed now, or do I have another 5 minutes? That's an emotional reaction. So it's a case of understanding that our emotions drive everything that we do, and get our emotions to work for us rather than against us.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm so fascinated with, and I'm writing a lot about the concept of personal agency. And so when I think about emotions and how they drive us, one of the things I think about is how important it is for each individual to be aware and to know what to do with those emotions and to make choices. Like you're talking about, have emotional intelligence. That emotional intelligence is what allows us to have agency over our own bodies and such. And I think that a lot of people don't even realize how often they're driven by those emotional reactions that they're having. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, it depends upon what paper you read. And I'm talking about academic papers. As human beings, we experience anything between about 3,000 and 27,000 emotions. Now, many of these we don't have a name for and we don't have a label for. And I wouldn't suggest we try and label all 27,000 or even all 3,000. I think the important thing here is just to go back to simplistically saying to yourself, I am feeling unpleasant at the moment. What's driving that? Or I am feeling pleasant at the moment. What's driving that? And what do I work with it? I'll give you a very simple example. I was driving at the weekend and somebody called me on the telephone, on the mobile phone. And I was waiting for a call from the bank. So I picked up the phone, started to talk to the person. I was driving along a narrow country lane. And in the end, I thought, this is dangerous. And I just cut the person off. And I felt incredibly rude. And I didn't phone the person back because I didn't recognize the number. But as I continued driving, I did not feel good about that. First of all, I put myself and my car in a very dangerous situation. And I was feeling not particularly good about the way in which I'd reacted to the situation. And I wasn't feeling particularly good about the other person on the other end of the telephone. So I really felt not good. I felt unpleasant. But it was a case of recognizing that, and recognizing as I drove along that that was the situation that caused me to feel that way, and to try and then work with it in a more positive way. There wasn't anything that I could do about it at the time, because my driver at that particular moment in time was me, and I actually had to make myself safe, drive the car sensibly, and put myself into a position where I was safe and forget about the phone. So that's, like I say, a very small, simple example. Now chunk that up into a relationship, chunk that up into a social interaction, chunk that up into a work scenario, and you can see how emotions can wax and wane, ebb and flow, and they will go from one to another. And going back to that example, I can't put a label on those emotions. I just know I did not feel good.
Yeah. So when you say to work with it or work around it, what is that process?
Well, first of all, it's recognition. It's recognizing your emotion and your emotional state. If you can say, I am feeling angry at the moment, and this is the reason why I'm feeling angry, and this is what I'm going to do with the anger, great. If you can say to yourself, I'm feeling happy at the moment, this is what's driving the happiness, this is what I'm doing with it, that's great. And, these are basic human emotions. So if we can recognize that, fantastic. But like I say, let's go back to simplicity. How is it making you feel at the moment? Are you feeling pleasant? Are you feeling unpleasant? And what are you going to do with that emotion? And the choice might simply be, I'm not going to do anything. I'm just recognizing it. And a simple way to work with this is to set a timer to go off at random times throughout the day. When the timer goes off, all you do is stop, reset the timer, and think to yourself, how am I feeling at the moment? What's driving that feeling? What can I do about it? Then get back to work. And the more you do that, the more experienced you will become at recognizing your emotions, your emotional state, and you will work with them in a way which is more positive.
So you recognize and then you work with them. So tell me more about the working with them. So what's after recognition?
Right. Look, I'm going to be very, very straight with everybody. It is great for Andrea and Robin to sit here talking about, oh, this is the way in which you work with emotions. Wonderful theory, wonderful theory, but putting it into the practice is incredibly hard. And more often than not, we will react to the situation that we find ourselves in. And it's after the event we can then go back and think, didn't handle that particularly well.
So true.
So, learn from that. So if you're then faced with the same situations, you can then actually stop yourself and say, look, I've been here before. I've got a better understanding of what to do. And if you do it again, don't worry about it. Go with it. But at some point, think to yourself, what could I have done that would have been more appropriate? How can I respect myself more around my emotions? Now, again, I'm going to repeat this. It is very easy for me to say. It is incredibly hard to do. And this is why emotional intelligence is often dismissed. And this is why emotions are often dismissed.
I know that when I was growing up, I would say when I was kind of a young adult, I I journaled like prolifically. It was insane how much I journaled. But I was doing a lot of that, looking back on the day and thinking about what I'd experienced and how I felt about it and what I wish would have happened or how I would deal about it, how I would deal with it differently or what I wanted to do or like that sort of thing. And it seemed like I just learned so much about myself and my perspective and I think I gained a lot of emotional intelligence by journaling. What are your thoughts on journaling?
Oh, I think journaling is a remarkably wonderful tool for exactly what we're talking about. Now, you say you did it, for some reason you stopped doing it, but at the moment, let's look at it and look at it very, very positively. You wouldn't be doing what you're doing today if you hadn't done your journaling and if you hadn't learnt about yourself and
Mm-hmm.
if you hadn't developed a degree of emotional intelligence. So your journaling has been very positive to get you to where you are today.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I've got to clarify something here, Andrea. Am I emotionally intelligent? Now, this is a really interesting question because if I answer yes, it's rather arrogant, self-conceited, and suggests there's no room for improvement. But if I answer no, what on earth am I doing in the field of emotional intelligence? Now, there are going to be certain times when I go into situations and I come out of it and think, yeah, I handled myself well, everything went well, I built a relationship. It's better because of that interaction rather than it being, it's better because of the interaction that we've just gone through. And then there are other times that I will go into a situation and I'll completely screw up. It just will not work. And that's because I'm human like everybody else. But in those sort of situations, I come out and think, what did I do that I could have done better?
Mm.
And rather than berating myself, you know, a bit of that and a bit of self-flagellation doesn't do any harm at all. Rather than focusing in on that, what is it that I can do in order to make the situation better if I'm faced with it again? And that's where the journaling piece comes in.
Yeah. So in the last couple of years, there's been a bit of a shift in the way that people in learning and development have been talking about soft skills. Um, they're using the words human power skills now. And that's as a distinction between humans and the unique contributions that humans make, between that and what machines can do, because now we have machine learning and we have AI, and we don't know where all that's going, but we know that there's something really important about these human skills. I'm wondering how you see the role of emotional intelligence changing the way that we look at work as we're moving forward into the future.
I don't see emotional intelligence change in the way in which we look at work as we move forward. I see humans coming round to the fact that it is emotional intelligence that will drive that change.
Mm.
So all of the power skills, the human power skills, are underpinned by emotional intelligence. It doesn't matter which one you look at. Emotional intelligence is a key fundamental part of that skill. And I think what we've got to do as humans is we've got to recognize what it is that we can do that the machines can't. And there are four key areas where emotional intelligence drives that. The first is something we've been talking about all the time we've been on here. It's decision making. It's around making judgments. Now, a machine cannot make a judgment as to whether to have a cup of tea or a cup of coffee. Well, it doesn't need it anyway, but if it was, it wouldn't be able to make that decision. A machine wouldn't be able to make a decision as to whether to buy a red car or a blue car, because these are decisions driven by emotions. So judgment is also a key part of decision making. And as human beings, we make judgments. Now, let's make the most appropriate judgments that we can make based upon what it is that we are facing. The next area is creativity, innovation, and being an artist. So creativity is something that we do well as human beings, and we can be quite innovative. We can actually, I hate the expression, but we can think outside the box. And we can come up with new ways of looking at things, new perspectives, and through that we can drive change. The other thing that we can do that the machines cannot do, and that's network, and that's build up relationships. We have been children, and through children, we have through being children, we have certain experiences. We've been naughty, we've learned through that. We've got some great experiences of when we go on holiday. We've got great experiences of interactions with people when things either didn't go right and they didn't go horribly wrong, but they were funny at the time. And we can share these experiences. So we're not going to go out for a coffee, a meal, a drink with a robot and share these experiences. We're going to go out and share them with our colleagues and with our friends. And then the final area that we've just got to recognize as being fundamentally human is our spirituality, our search for meaning, looking at our ethics and our values. Why am I here? What am I doing on this planet? Where is my life going? What am I trying to achieve? What is my relationship with God, however you perceive him or her to be? What is my place within the universe? These are big, big, big questions that are beyond the algorithms and the data that the machines work through.
Yeah, those are you were just really ready with those four categories. I'm really
Oh,
glad that
I've been working very hard on this,
yes,
Andrea.
yes. Well, they are very important. And so you're saying that emotional intelligence is a foundational piece of each of those ways that we're uniquely human. That's what you're saying?
Yes, yes, yes. And I think we've got to recognize that. Let's go back. Let's go back to the definition. It's being smart with feelings in order to make good quality decisions and build up authentic relationships with the intention of taking action. So, with all that in mind, we've just got to look at what makes us profoundly human and build upon it. That's going to keep us safe, and that's going to keep us safe in the future.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that whole question of what makes us human and meaning of life stuff that comes with it, um, it just feels like a big question right now for everybody. And as we're looking not just at how our business is going to incorporate AI and that sort of thing, but what is the future of work in general? What's the future of humanity in general? These are big questions to wrestle with.
They are, and I think for everybody, they've just got to put themselves into a situation where they feel in control. What is it that you can control?
Yeah.
You can control your skills and capabilities about decision and judgment. You can control your skills and capabilities about being innovative and creative. You can control your skills and capabilities around building relationships and networking. You can control your skills and capabilities about understanding and working with ethics, morals, and values. And all of these are things that you can learn to develop. So go into your current role and say, where am I practicing and utilizing these capabilities? How can I shore them up for the future? How can I future-proof myself? Because these are going to be the skills that are going to be needed. These are the power skills. These are the skills that the skills-based economy have not quite recognized yet as being the important ones. Oh, we want our people to be able to work with AI. Yeah, okay, right. That'll last about 10 years at most. What we need are people who can make decisions, do it with with and through people, work in teams, collaborate, um, be innovative, and do it with the right ethics and the right values. Those are the skills that the skill-based economy should be looking at, not whether somebody can switch a machine on or do programming or appropriately utilize machine learning in their work. A robot can do that.
Yes, exactly. I love it. And so so I appreciate what you said about individuals future proofing themselves and getting ready for what's coming. And so that also feels like emotional intelligence then, and all these skills that you're mentioning, these four particular areas, that individuals should be focusing on those areas. And one question that I have been wrestling with quite a bit has been education and where education is, where it's going. And so I'm curious, what role should emotional intelligence play in education as we're looking forward to the future?
Well, I think we've just got to recognize how we learn and the learning process. And what drives the learning process are emotions. So how do we get people to emotionally engage with the learning process? And a
Yeah.
lot of that is down to recognizing learning styles. So look, the let the robots, let the algorithms, let the machines learn through the algorithms, data processing, facts and information. We have at our disposal the most wonderful computers that fit in our pockets. They're called mobile phones. And this gives us access to any information really at our fingertips. So what we've got to do is to learn how to use this information in order to drive our decision making, our creativity, build up our relationships, and make the most moral and ethical decisions that we can move forward with. So I think these are the important things in learning. What is it that we can do to move humanity forward? How can we engage with humans? How can we deal with the big problems that we are facing at the moment? How can we get our politicians to do the right thing? How can we tackle climate change? I think these are the big questions that as human beings, we really ought to be addressing, not whether the machines are going to take over the world like some dysfunctional scientific story that I enjoyed as a boy and I still enjoy today. So, I think we just got to answer the big questions. And these are the big questions that only we can answer as human beings. It fits under the spirituality banner. So it's not about religion, although that's a part of it as well. It's about answering these big questions. And this is the way that I see emotional intelligence progressing and transforming itself over the coming decades.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground when it comes to emotional intelligence and where it's come from and where it's going. And I'm curious, how did you get interested in this topic in the first place, Robin?
Well, look, I've got to take you back to the last century. When I was working as a salesperson, I was working in the London teaching hospitals for the pharmaceutical industry, and I was selling medicines, good quality medicines into the London teaching hospitals, anti-infectives that every doctor used, antibiotics, anti-ulcer medicines, anti-migraine medicines, cancer treatments. And I found that some of the doctors that I engaged with were really, really encouraging, great people to deal with, asked some really sensible questions, treated me like another human being. And there were some doctors that were decidedly unpleasant. They were horrible. They were rude, obnoxious, abusive. They were abusive not to me as a man, they were abusive to me as a role. And I didn't understand what was going on. And it wasn't until I moved up to the northwest of England, away from London, to take up a leadership role, that I suddenly realized it was around the way in which they were working with people. And it was at the time that Daniel Goleman published his books that came into the public arena around emotional intelligence. And I thought, thereby lies the answer that I've been looking for. Those people that were very engaging, that were able to make me feel pleasant and for us to have a good quality relationships, had emotional intelligence. Those other people weren't at the time being emotionally intelligent. So that then encouraged me to look at it further. And then through a whole series of job redundancies and changes in my role, I found myself in a situation where I thought, right, I can now concentrate on this emotional intelligence and build a business up around it. Because what I'm interested in doing is developing people and trying to change the world in my own sweet, small way.
Hmm. And you also incorporate positive psychology. Can you tell us a little bit about positive psychology?
Yes, so I didn't study psychology when I was at university because at the time psychology was all about finding out what's wrong and what's wrong with the way in which people act and how people behave. positive psychology then became an area of working with psychology, which is looking at utilizing psychology and behavior for the good. So another example I can give you, I was asked only today to come up with an example of where I've been a failure. And I really, really, really struggle to come up with a credible answer. Yeah, things have gone wrong and I've made inappropriate decisions and they've not gone the way that I wanted to, but I wouldn't label myself as a failure. I've learned from it. And okay, I perhaps didn't like the outcome, but here I am today, still alive, still breathing, still running my business. So something's gone right. What is it that's gone right? And what is it that what is it that I can do more of? And that is the fundamental principles of positive psychology.
Yeah. Yeah. Focusing on what's worked is so much more convincing to people too. So people don't want to be proven wrong. They want to know that they're right about something. So even if you're trying to convince somebody of something else, finding a way to figure out what's already working and then building on that instead of just trying to shift a whole mindset is also, I don't know, that's fascinating. This is all fascinating to me because this is Voice of Influence podcast. We're all trying to figure out
Yeah.
what does it mean to have a voice of influence.
Yes, and I think I've got to say this in terms of what is right and what is working. What works for you, Andrea, might not work for me.
Yeah.
So it's not a case of, oh, this is what I did, go away and do it, and you'll have exactly the same results. No, you're not me, I'm not you. I haven't got your memories, your background, your experience.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't got that ability, which makes you the human that you are and what makes me the human that I am. So it really is a case of recognizing our own choices and work with them to have the influence that we need to have when we're working with other people.
And another question around resilience. You talk about emotional resilience. Can you share a little bit about how emotional intelligence and emotional resilience play off of one another, or how one helps the other? Because I know there's a lot of burnout, there's a lot of people that are struggling right now, and sometimes resilience training can come across the corporate training log, and there's this expectation that if we train people to be resilient they'll be better, but there's also this we acknowledge that resilience is also about the environment that you're in too. There's so much to it, so I'm wondering what your take is on emotional resilience.
Oh, it's almost another podcast in itself, Andrea. But yeah,
Probably.
very, very simply, again, let's knock one of the myths on the head. Resilience is not about bouncing back. It's not about bouncing. I think the problem with resilience is the word came from material science back in the middle of last century, where it's a measure of stress over strain. It doesn't work beyond a certain point in human psychology because we're not springs, we're not bits of elastic. We don't necessarily bounce back.
Yeah.
We grow and we learn through this experience. And this is what makes us more resilient. So my definition of resilience really is having an understanding, firstly, that life is meaningful. So it's back to the spirituality piece. It's then having a clear understanding of what it is that you're trying to do. So it's having a focus on what you are trying to achieve. And then it's having the creativity and innovation and adaptability to work around what life throws at you. Again, you might not like it, but what is it that you can do to make the most of your lot? And to work with the emotions that you find yourself experiencing when you're faced with a situation. So it's back to creativity and innovation. Now, resilience itself is often thought of being a component of emotional intelligence, and to some extent it is, but I see resilience more as an output of emotional intelligence. So it's this piece around regulating and working with your emotions. Are they unpleasant? Are they pleasant? They're unpleasant. I don't like the situation that I find myself in. It is causing me immense emotional problems. What can I do about it? What choices have I got?
I think those are really good questions. And one of the other questions that comes to mind with this, to me, is when do you stay and when do you leave a situation based on your emotional reactions? And so I'm curious what your take is on that.
Yes, and I think I can't answer that question for everybody. You've got
Yeah.
to make some choices, and you've got to say, is this situation, am I getting some emotional requirement from this situation? Is this abusive relationship that I'm in fueling me emotionally? And I don't want to leave. And you've got to ask yourself that hard question, because if it is too intense for you, emotionally and physically, you've got a choice.
Hmm.
You need to exercise the choices that are right for you. And again, easy for you and I to talk about on a podcast. Very, very, very difficult to do. People will make the wrong choices. And okay, you will make the wrong choice. You've made a choice. Good. At least you've made a decision and you're doing something. Now work with it. What are the choices open to you? Where do those choices take you? And more often than not, we're in situations where we've got a choice of, say, theoretically, 5 things. We don't like any of them. We don't like any of them, but we've got to make a choice. What's the least worst of the lot of them? Because
Yeah.
work with that one.
Yeah. Oh, that's good. Oh, this has been a great conversation. I know that both of us care about this topic a lot and could talk for quite a while. But Robin, can you tell us how people can find you and your work?
Yeah, by all means, look for me on LinkedIn. My name's Robin Hill. So there are quite a few other Robin Hills, but I've been very fortunate. And I was on LinkedIn early and I got the URL that is just purely Robin Hill. So look for me on LinkedIn. The other way is to look for me on my website, which is EI for change, that's number 4 change.com.
Yeah. And we'll link to that in the show notes as well. One last question for you, Robin. What last piece of advice do you want to give to somebody who wants to have a voice of influence?
Well, first of all, listen to other voices and hear what they're saying. And if somebody is telling you that you've already got a voice of influence, build upon it and work on it. And don't throw that piece of feedback to somebody and say, oh, no, I haven't. You're far better than I am, or words to that effect. Just work with it. We can all be a voice of influence. You don't need to be Robin Hills. You don't need to be Andrea Wenberg. You have a voice of influence. Go out and get it heard.
Mm. Mm. Thank you so much for being a voice of influence for our listeners today, Robin. Appreciate it.
It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you ever so much, Andrea.